Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 8 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. It's a very good book, I will say that. It accurately depicts a dystopic society, and it's kind of ahead of its time, actually, considering this was written in, I believe, 1948. I think they just took and reversed the 8 and the 4. And so yeah, first of all, the copyright information. As always, hopefully this cover remains intact. It's kind of in bad shape. I need to tape it, probably, because it's a very old copy. This is a 1961 copy, and it does say that all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. So I'm counting on that, actually. Now, it's been a while since I've actually did Chapter 8. I mean, part 8. So I'm not exactly sure exactly where we are, but we are here somewhere. Oops. Ugh. Let's see. I do kind of remember. We will reread this one. I believe this is a reread. We're gonna go back, and so hopefully we don't miss anything. I'm pretty sure that I was to this part right here. Apologize in advance. If not, I can go back and check and maybe make any amends later. It was a lonely hour of 15. Winston could not now remember how he had come to be in the cafe at such a time. The place was almost empty. A tinny music was trickling from the telescreens. The three men sat in their corner almost motionless, never speaking, uncommanded. The waiter brought Uncommanded, the waiter brought fresh glasses of gin. There was a chessboard on the table beside them, with the pieces set out, but no game started. And then, for perhaps half a minute in all, something happened to the telescreens. The tune that they were playing changed, and the tone of the music changed too. There came into it, but it was something hard to describe. It was a peculiar, cracking, braying, jeering note. In his mind, Winston called it a yellow note, and then a voice from the telescreen was singing. Under the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me. There lie they, and here lie we, under the spreading chestnut tree. The three men never stirred, but when Winston glanced again at Rutherford's ruinous face, he saw that his eyes were full of tears, and for the first time he noticed, with a kind of inward shudder, and yet not knowing at what he shuddered, that both Aronson and Rutherford had broken noses. A little later, all three were rearrested. It appeared that they had engaged in fresh conspiracies from the very moment of their release. At their second trial, they confessed to all their old crimes over again, with a whole string of new ones. They were executed, and their fate was recorded in the party histories. A warning to posterity. About 5 years after this, in 1973, Winston was unrolling a wad of documents which had just flopped out of the pneumatic tube onto his desk, when he came to a fragment of paper which had evidently been slipped in amongst the others and then forgotten. The instant he had flattened it out, he saw its significance. It was a half-page torn out of the Times of about 10 years earlier. The top half of the page, so that it included the date, and it contained a photograph of the delegates at some party function in New York. Prominent in the middle of the group were Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford. There was no mistaking them. In any case, their names were in the caption at the bottom. The point was that at both trials, all three men had confessed, but on that date, they had been on Eurasian soil. They had flown from a secret airfield in Canada to a rendezvous somewhere in Siberia, and had conferred with members of the Eurasian General Staff, to whom they had betrayed they had betrayed important military secrets. The date had stuck in Winston's memory because it chanced to be midsummer day. But the whole story must be on record in countless other places as well. There was only one possible conclusion. The confessions were lies. Of course, this was not in itself a discovery. Even at that time, Winston had not imagined that the people who were wiped out in the purges had actually committed the crimes that they were accused of. But there was concrete evidence. It was a fragment of the abolished past, like a fossil bone which turns up in the wrong stratum and destroys a geological theory. It was enough to blow the party to atoms if in some way it could have been published to the world and its significance made known. He'd gone straight to working as soon as he saw what the photograph was and what it meant. He had covered it up with another sheet of paper. Luckily, when he unrolled it, it had been upside down for the point of view of the telescreen. He took his scribbling pad on his knee and pushed back his chair so as to get as far away from the telescreen as possible. To keep your face expressionless was not difficult, and even your breathing could be controlled with an effort. But you could not control the beating of your heart, and the telescreen was quite delicate enough to pick it up. He let what he judged to be 10 minutes go by, tormented all the while by the fear that some accident, a sudden draught blown across the desk, for instance, would betray him. Then, without uncovering it again, he dropped the photograph into the memory hole along with some other waste paper. Within another minute, perhaps, it would have crumbled into ashes. That was 10, 11 years ago. Today, probably, he would have kept that photograph. It was curious that the fact of having held it in his fingers seemed to him to make a difference, even now, when the photograph itself, as well as the event it recorded, was only memory. Was the party's hold upon the past less strong, he wondered, because a piece of evidence which existed no longer had once existed? But today, supposing that it could be somehow resurrected from its ashes, the photograph might not even be evidence. Already at the time he made his discovery, Oceania was no longer at war with Eurasia, and it must have been to the agents of Eurasia that the three dead men had betrayed their country. Since then, there had been other changes. 2, 3, he could not remember. How many? Very likely the confessions had been rewritten until the original facts and dates no longer had the smallest significance. The past not only changed, but changed continuously. What most afflicted him was the sense of nightmare that he had never clearly understood why the huge imposture was undertaken. The immediate advances of falsifying the past were obvious, but the ultimate motive was mysterious. He took up his pen again and wrote. I understand how, I don't understand why. He wondered, as he had many times wondered before, whether he himself was a lunatic. Perhaps a lunatic was simply a minority of one. At one time, it had been a sign of madness to believe that the earth goes round the sun. Today, to believe that the past is unalterable. He may be alone in holding that belief. And if alone, then a lunatic. But the thought of being a lunatic did not greatly trouble him. The horror was that he might also be wrong. He picked up the children's history book and looked at the portrait of Big Brother, which formed its frontispiece. The hypnotic eyes gazed into his own. It was as though some huge force was pressing down upon you. something that penetrated inside your skull, battering against your brain, frightening you out of your beliefs, persuading you almost to deny the evidence of your senses. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make the claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it, not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by the philosophy. The hearsay of hearsays was common sense, and what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4, or that the forces of gravity work, or that the force of gravity works, or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, what then? But no. His courage seemed suddenly to stiffen of its own accord. The face of O'Brien, not called up by any obvious association, had floated into his mind. He knew with most certainty that with more certainty than before, that O'Brien was on his side. He was writing the diary for O'Brien, to O'Brien. It was like an interminable letter which no one would ever read, but which he addressed to a particular person and took its color from that fact. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectuals would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were wrong, and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall towards the earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4. If that is granted, all else follows." We are on to chapter 8. Okay, 8. From somewhere at the bottom of the passage, the smell of roasting coffee, real coffee, not victory coffee, came floating out into the street. Winston paused involuntarily. For perhaps 2 seconds, he was back in the half-forgotten world of his childhood. Then the door banged. Then a door banged, seeming to cut off the smell as abruptly as though it had been a sound. He had walked several kilometers over pavements, and his varicose ulcer was throbbing. This was the second time in 3 weeks that he had missed an evening at the community center. A rash act, since you could be certain that the number of your attendance at the center was carefully checked. In principle, a party member had no spare time and was never alone except in bed. It was assumed that when he was not working, eating, or sleeping, he would be taking part in some kind of communal recreations. To do anything that suggested a taste for solitude, even to go for a walk by yourself, was also slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in Newspeak. Own life. It was called meaning individualism and eccentricities. But this evening, as he came out of the ministry, the balminess of the April air had tempted him. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen in that year. And suddenly, the long, noisy evening at the center, the boring, exhausting games, the lectures, the creaking camaraderie, oiled by gin, had seemed intolerable. Or, on impulse, he had turned away from the bus stop and wandered off into the labyrinth of London. First south, then east, then north again, losing himself along unknown streets, and hardly bothering in which direction he was going. If there is hope, he had written in the diary, it lies in the proles. The words kept coming back to him. Statement. Okay. Statement. To him. Statement of a mystical truth and a palpable absurdity. He was somewhere in the vague brown-colored slums of the north and east, and what had once been St. Pancras Station. He was walking up a cobbled street of little two-story houses with battered doorways, which gave straight on the pavement, and which were somehow curiously suggestive of rat holes. There were puddles of filthy water here and there among the cobbles. In and out of the dark doorways and down narrow alleyways that branched off to either side, people swarmed in astonishing numbers. Girls in full bloom, with crudely lipsticked mouths, and youths who chased the girls, and swollen, waddling women who showed you what the girls would be like in 10 years. Later. The old bent creatures shuffling along on splayed feet, and rugged barefoot children who played in the puddles and then scattered at angry yells from their mothers. Perhaps a quarter of the windows of the street were broken and boarded up. Most of the people paid no attention to Winston. A few eyed him with a sort of guarded curiosity. Two monstrous women with brick-red forearms folded across their aprons were talking outside a doorway. Winston caught scraps of the conversation as he approached. "Yes, I say to her, that's all very well, I says, but if you'd be in my place, you'd have done the same as what I done. It's easy to criticize, I says, but you ain't got the same problems as what I got." "Ah," said the other, "that's just it. That's just where it is." The strident voices stopped abruptly. The women studied him in hostile silence as he went past. But it was not hostility exactly, merely a kind of wariness, a momentary stiffening as at the passing of some unfamiliar animal. The blue overalls of the party could not be a common sight in a street like this. Indeed, it was unwise to be seen in such places unless you had a definite business there. The patrols might stop you if you happened to run into them. "May I see your papers, comrade? What are you doing here? What time did you leave work? Is this your usual way home?" And so on and so forth. Not that there was any rule against walking home by any unusual route, but it was enough to draw attention to you if the thought police heard about it. Suddenly, the whole street was in commotion. There were yells of warning from all sides. People were shooting into the doorways like rabbits. A young woman leapt out of a doorway a little ahead of Winston, grabbing up a tiny child playing in a puddle, whipped her apron around it, and leaped back again, all in one movement. At the same instant, a man in a concertina-like black suit, who had emerged from a side alley, ran towards Winston, pointing excitedly to the sky. "Steamer!" he yelled. "Look out, governor! Bang overhead! Look down quick!" Steamer was a nickname which, for some reason, the proles applied to a rocket bomb. Winston promptly flung himself on his face. The proles were nearly always right. When they gave you a warning of that kind, they seemed to possess a kind of instinct which told them several seconds in advance when a rocket was coming. Although the rocket supposedly traveled faster than sound, Winston clasped his forearms about his head. There was a roar that seemed to make the pavement heave. A shower of light objects pattered onto his back. When he stood up, he found that he was covered with fragments of glass from the nearest window. He walked on. The bomb had demolished a group of houses 200 meters up the street. A black plume of smoke hung in the sky, and below it a cloud of plaster dust, in which a crowd had already formed round the ruins. There was a little pile of plaster lying on the pavement ahead of him, and in the middle of it he could see a bright red streak. When he got up to it, he saw that it was a human hand severed at the wrist. Apart from the bloody stump, the hand was so completely whitened as to resemble a plaster cast. He kicked the thing into the gutter, and then, to avoid the crowd, turned down a side street to the right. Within 3 or 4 minutes, he was out of the area which the bomb had affected, and the sordid swarming life of the streets was going on as though nothing had happened. It was nearly 20 hours, and the drinking shops which the proles frequented, pubs they called them, were choked with customers. From their grimy swinging doors, endlessly opening and shutting, there came forth a smell of urine, sawdust, and sour beer. In an angle formed by a projecting house front, 3 men were standing very close together. The middle one of them was holding a folded-up newspaper, which the other 2 were studying over his shoulder. Even before he was near enough to make out the expressions on their faces, Winston could see absorption in every line of their bodies. It was obvious some serious piece of news that they were reading. He was a few paces away from them. Then suddenly the group broke up, and 2 of the men, were in violent altercation. For a moment, they seemed almost on the point of blows. Can't you bleedin' well listen to what I say? I tell you, no number ending in 7 ain't won for over 14 months. Yes, it has then. No, it has not. Back home, I got the old lot of 'em for over 2 years, wrote down on a piece of paper. I takes 'em down regular as a clock, and I tell you that no number ending in 7, yes, a 7 has won. I can pretty near tell you that bleeding number, 407, it ended in. It were in February, 2nd week in February. February, your grandmother. I got it all down in black and white, and I tell you no number. Oh, pack it in, said the 3rd man. They were talking about the lottery. Winston looked back when he had gone 30 meters. They were still arguing, with vivid, passionate faces. The lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid serious attention. It was probable that there were some millions of proles for whom the lottery was the principal, if not the only reason for remaining alive. It was their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulant. When the lottery was where the lottery was concerned, even people who could barely read and write seemed capable of intricate calculations and staggering feats of memory. There was a whole tribe of men who made a living simply by selling systems, forecasts, and lucky amulets. Winston had nothing to do with the running of the lottery, which was managed by the Ministry of Plenty. But he was aware, indeed everyone in the party was aware, that the prizes were largely imaginary. Only small sums were actually paid out, the winners of the big prizes being non-existent persons, in the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Oceania and the other. This was not difficult to arrange. But if there was hope, it lay in the proles. You had to cling onto that. When you put in words that sounded reasonable, it was when you looked at the human beings passing you on the pavement, and it became an act of faith. The street into which he had turned ran downhill. He had a feeling that he had been in this neighborhood before, and that there was a main thoroughfare not far away. From somewhere ahead there came a din of shouting voices. The street took on a sharp turn, and he ended up in a flight of steps which led down into a sunken alley where a few stall keepers were selling tired-looking vegetables. At this moment, Winston remembered where he was. The alley led out onto the main street and down the next turning. Not 5 minutes away was a junk shop where he had bought the blank book, which was now his diary, and in a small stationery shop not far away he had bought the pen holder and the bottle of ink. He paused for a moment at the top of the steps. On the opposite side of the alley there was a dingy little pub whose windows appeared to be frosted over, but in reality were merely coated with dust. A very old man, bent but active, with white mustache and bristled forehead, that bristled forward like those of a prawn, pushed open the swinging door and went in. As Winston stood watching, it occurred to him that the old man, who might have been 80 at the least, had already been middle-aged when the revolution happened. He and a few others like him were the last links that now existed with the vanished world of capitalism. In the party itself there were not many people whose ideas had been formed before the revolution. The older generation had mostly been wiped out in the great purges of the 50s and 60s, and the few who survived had long ago been terrified into complete intellectual surrender. If there was anyone alive who could give you a truthful account of the condition of the early part of the century, it could only be a prole. Suddenly, the passage from the history book that he had copied into his diary came back to Winston's mind, and a lunatic impulse took a hold of him. He would go into the pub. He would scrape acquaintance with the old man and question him. He would say to him, "Tell me about your life when you were a boy. What was it like in those days? Were things better than they are now? Were they worse?" Okay, I have to stop it here, but we will pick it up and find out if he actually does that. This has been part 9 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all of the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.